Hello there. Are you experiencing a temporary setback in your spiritual growth journey as a form of negative, harmful pattern of behavior in times of stress? Do you feel like you have been pulled in a negative streak that has developed into a momentum, a certain inertia in your life? Do you want to tap out of it and bounce back from it? Are you looking for a reset? If that's the case, then this video can point you to the right place. Stick with me, and I will be sharing with you some of my insights that I believe can greatly help you. Let's first discuss a little bit what is meant by negative momentum. The term negative momentum, or word itself, negative or quote unquote negative, can be a lot of times subjective term, because a lot of it has to do with our own perception. And retrospectively, when the situation has passed, emotions have tempered down, we can often see that what we initially perceived as something unpleasant, unwanted, and very bad development for ourselves actually turned out very beneficial for us, and it was needed for development. So term negative momentum can be subjective. Also, we have to understand that staying for too long in a suffering mode can cause bigger harm than we think, because sometimes I see this trap in spiritual cycles when a spiritual seeker thinks that if he remains, or if he experiences certain experiences that can be described as suffering, then he has still something to gain from that, and by that he gives his own meaning to that specific situation. Sometimes people think, or they have this belief, that they have not yet processed out fully their inner state, their inner feelings, and they think that they still need to remain in this suffering state or consciousness to fully understand it, to fully process it out. And that can sometimes be a trap, and it can be unconscious pattern or a desire to suffer, to punish the self, to almost look like a saint or a noble. There is nothing noble in that. So we have to be careful about that, and not to stay a never-ending analyzer or observer of the same situation that has already no more beneficial for us, and we need to move forward. So that's also thing to notice. But returning back to the question, so what is meant by a negative momentum in the context of this particular video? And I will try to give an example that hopefully will better explain this, and you will relate to it better. So here's the example. Let's imagine all that there is this person called John. John, just like me and you, is also a spiritual seeker. John lives his life, and one day a disruptive event or situation happens, and in that moment John goes into reactive mode, which is unconscious egoic response. John's mood gets affected by negative emotions, and he experiences negative stream of negative thoughts that also impact his behavior, his choices, his attitude, etc. So John gets triggered to somehow quickly compensate his pain, his feeling of suffering, and this sudden disruptive event that occurred has activated John's unhealed parts, or you could say his shadow aspects, and has highlighted his egoic patterns that need to be resolved. So John wants to cope with that. And the usual method of coping mechanism for him has been that of distraction. So old addictive or addictions resurface in his life. So he can forget at least a little bit about his own inner pain, and he can avoid external situation and not to take responsibility for that, at least for some time. And this reactive John's behavior continues at least for a couple of hours, maybe in course of a couple of days. For John, there is a temptation to ease his pain quickly through things that in long term does not serve him well. And this continues, and it gets worse and worse, and John knows that he cannot continue for much any longer like this. So he needs some kind of reset. And this negative momentum that John has found himself in stops John's previously started positive momentum of new habits, new attitudes, new action of achieving new goals. So that's stopped. And at the same time, when this negative momentum happens, John also feels dull, almost like drunk. He also feels lethargic. He doesn't have a lot of energy, lack of energy. He has difficulty, incredible difficulty of thinking and coming up with qualitative solutions to not that difficult situations in life. And also his creative flow has seized. Um, John is basically filled with trash, mentally, emotionally, energetically, also physically, and he needs to clear that out of his system. And his brain is also overloaded with useless information at this point. There is maybe entertainment, nothing else. So John needs to tap out of this and get restart. So this is a situation that I described as an example how in life it can look like a person that has fallen into a negative momentum, and we are humans. We experience ups and downs in our life, and certainly there are some kind of events that can trigger that. Most of us are not completely free from our ego yet, so that's an egoic pattern that can happen. And another thing that I want to mention is that we have to recognize that during this suffering phase or negative momentum, they can serve us still as a great awakener. These negative moments have inbuilt positive upside or positive potential, and that can help us to transform, help us to grow, help us to develop. So these negative moments can point us back to the right path. They can help us, guide us, help us to recalibrate through this feedback of contrast, and to get back to our right path. So on the one hand it's negative, on the other hand we can turn around it, we can bounce back from it. So the question is, how do we bounce back from it? Obviously for different people works different things in different ways, but in order for us to shift our consciousness or state of our consciousness, one key thing that is common to all people is necessity of awareness. In some shape or form, awareness has to be present. It has to be simply there. And when you recognize that the current momentum that you are involved or engaged in is making it worse and worse, and is not serving you in long term, naturally a change is needed through different course of action. So then question arises, what kind of action? And this is where I would like to speak more about disruption. Disruption of harmful, dysfunctional behavior. As I mentioned previously in the example of John, when life suddenly brought a disruptive event in his life, we learned that life gives us these disruptive events, occurrences, situations. It's basically like a help from universe to stop doing the wrong thing and to recalibrate to the right path. So if life is giving us disruptive events, which in practice looks like, for example, a person loses his job, or something breaks up, or a relationship ends, or change of living conditions happen, then initially it can be perceived as something very bad luck, as they say, but actually it's disruptive event coming from life as a guidance, as feedback that tells us you have to change. There is something wrong. You can't continue live in the old ways, otherwise it will get worse. So this is why life sends us these disruptive events, and we can learn from that. If life brings us disruptive events, then we can certainly also apply the same to stop our own behavior, our own reactive state, ego patterns, which continues to keep us in a low vibration, low consciousness, and it delays our growth needlessly, to say. So disruption is like a vehicle or like a tool that helps us to start or initiate transcending negative patterns. We can use that. So you might have a question: isn't disruption the same as distraction? And the short answer is no, it's not. And here's why. If distraction is a form of resistance, a form of suppression of what is, and not acceptance, and no surrender in that, then disruption is different. Disruption means that you reset your mind, you reset your nervous system, your body, your feelings, emotions, so that you can address your inner pain, your suffering, from a healthier state of consciousness. And we need to shift our state of consciousness in order for us to address this pain or suffering that we experience internally, because we cannot address it from the old, from the point of our old action or the same behavior that we are already experiencing through this ongoing negative momentum. Basically, what disruption does is it stops the negative course of action that stems out of our internal suffering or pain. And the suffering and pain in this case is the cause. And in order for us to deal with this internal suffering or cause, we need a different state of consciousness. We need different actions. We need different approach. And that is not distraction or suppression. We need different approach to deal with our suffering or process it out. And so we don't retain the vicious cycle of the old behavior that stemmed from this suffering, and that in turn fuels or feeds back the suffering consciousness itself. So it's never ending, like a cycle that keeps spinning. That's why we need disruption, a different, in form of different action. And disruption can slow down this negative momentum. It can not only slow down, but also stop it completely. And it almost serves like a retreat, a restart, reset for ourselves from the ongoing course of dysfunctional action and pattern. And initially it might be hard for us to disrupt this ongoing negative behavior, because it might have a strong hold on us, or sense of us, sense of our identity. It might have a strong pulling power. So even if we disrupt it, it might pull us back after a while. And in this case, again, awareness is very important to detect that, to see that, it happened again, it's happening again. Okay. In that case, you apply again some sort of disruptive method, so you don't fall back to that. And there is awareness that supports you with that. I've just spoken about disruption and the value of disruptive activity or events in our life, both from the life perspective and our own personal perspective. And right now I will share with you two of my ways how I personally switch my state of consciousness, and how I manage to reset myself and tap myself out of negative momentum to a positive one again. And number one way how I do it is spending time out in the nature. Nature is a very strong and supportive energy field, a field of vastness, of spaciousness, of unlimited space. It's like a god. And nature itself has a great supportive presence when we immerse ourselves in it. And when I am in nature, it helps me to release my toxic energies, thoughts, some bad emotions, and I mean, there are a couple of things that you can do outside nature. I mean, recently I have started to immerse myself in cold river water. I immerse myself up until the level of my chin. Rest of my body is underwater and it's cold. And whether I sit on my knees or other posture, but I'm under my water, I'm under the water, and the water is cold. And what it does is, I've noticed that it helps to slow down my breathing. Not only that, it also slows down my thinking up to the point that I can even reach states of no thought. And I usually spend around 10 minutes, maybe sometimes more, in this river. It's a great reset tool for me, and I can quickly shift from anxious state back to peaceful state of mind. Fantastic tool. Another thing that you can do in nature, what I do from time to time, is going on longer walks, minimum 1 to 2 hours. These are great for also processing out some internal processes, and the long walks are great for deep insights. So what's number 2 way how I reset myself? Number 2 is through physical activity. Some sort of work or other load that requires effort and energy spent. And I find this process very beneficial, especially to me, because it allows me very well to process out my internal shit, if you can say like that. In the beginning, it can feel frustrating because your mind can go on like, oh my God, this and that problem has not been resolved, or that suffering, or this bad situation, and you are doing this physical activity. Such thoughts can initially arise, but if you stick with the activity, they will subside. And such activity allows me to stay quite well in observer mode. And it also slows down my negative mental chatter, and I can very carefully observe these inner dialogues and stories that are activated inside me. This physical activity is like a meditation. It's like active meditation, like a practice of mindfulness, because it allows me to stay in observer mode until I can let go and there is no anxiety or stress anymore. And it also helps me to release the energy. For some people, there are different kinds of activities that they do to release energy. This is also one of the ways how you can do it. Uh, and when I engage myself in this physical activity, uh, by physical I mean it really requires of you to have a physical effort, whether it's some kind of field work, maybe you're um, picking berries on the field, or you saw the wood, or uh, you do something else, maybe you wash dishes inside, it doesn't matter, but it requires you to spend the energy. And when I do this, my attention or my awareness is split between the task, the physical task that I am doing in the moment, and the other part is uh, paying attention what's happening internally inside me, these internal voices, pain, suffering, this victim, or this unpleasant, that is, or these unpleasantry voices for ego. So there is a split, and it's very good, because if all of my attention would be only focused on um, my internal state of being, without any anchor in the present moment, then I might lose myself in this internal processes, because it can be too overwhelming for me. And that's why it's a good thing that there is some kind of anchor back. So part of the attention goes to the internal process, other part to what's happening in this moment right now around me. So it's splitted. It's very beneficial. Um, and I have done this physical activity repeatedly. It can be done repeatedly. It's a great way. So a question to you, uh, hearing this, is what are some of your ways that you can come up, or you have already come up, how you reset yourself from the negative momentum, ways that are different from the momentum that you found yourself in. For example, if you have distracted yourself with lots of information overload, your brain is tired, then different from that can be going in the nature without any music, any podcasts. You just go in the nature, and that's a quite contrast that can help you to recalibrate. So again, the main thing is for you to find um, your own way that works best for you as a reset button. In the end, what I want to say is, as a summary, how you can tap out of this negative momentum is you find a way or ways that help you, or that facilitate you becoming present. And it can differ and vary depending on your situation and circumstances. Leverage that. You don't have to be constrained to that. You can use that. I hope this video was useful to you, subscribe for more.